Welcome everyone to Bonifabcustom. Today I'm going to be showing you how I make a copper and steel Damascus. Let's get right into the build. Okay, to begin our copper Damascus billet, we need to organize what layers we're going to be putting where. Since copper really isn't hard, it's not a hard material. It can be hardened, but really not to keep a good edge. We want to keep the copper towards the outside, and we want to have a hardened steel on the inside or along the actual cutting edge of the knife. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be putting 2 pieces of 1095. Now I'm using 2 pieces because the material I have only is it's only 1/16 in thickness, and I want to make sure that I need to have it thick enough so when I forge weld it all together, it doesn't move around too much off of the cutting edge, because I want to make sure that that always stays right in the center of the blade. That's what's going to be sharpened, that's what's going to be used. Because of that, I'm going to be using 2 pieces of 1095, and they're 1/16 each. Now on the outside of those 2 pieces, I want something to give contrast, so I'm going to be using some 15N20, and they're also 1/16 in thickness, and they're going to be on the outside of that 1095. And then after that 1095, I'm going to be putting on the copper layer, 1 copper layer, and that's going to be a 1/16 copper. Now this is just some scrap copper that I have, and you can see it's really dirty. It gets corroded pretty easily over time. I want to make sure when I cut this to size, I need to clean it. So I'm going to just take a flap wheel and I'm going to clean both sides really well, and then after I have all my pieces, I'm going to clean everything with acetone before I put it all together. So 1095, 15N20, a piece of the 1/16 copper. Then I'm going to go back to the 15N20 to give that contrast, and then copper again. So there's 2 layers of copper on both sides. And then on the outside of that, I have a billet here of 50-layer Damascus, which is made up of 15N20 and 1095 that I made before. And I'm going to clean this up really nice, and I'm going to put that on the outside of this copper. Now I'm hoping what's going to happen is we're going to have this nice contrast in the middle, and if I'm careful enough, I won't cut into this 50 layer, and I should have a nice 50 layer pattern on top, and then this contrast on the inside of my blade. Now I'm going to stack this all together, and because I have this nice material on the outside, as I forge weld it down, it's going to get thinner. And after forge welding, I'm going to have the scale on here, and that I'm going to want to machine off. And because of that, I'm going to lose a lot of material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another layer of just some scrap 1/8 mild steel. And this is pretty worthless. So what that's going to give me is that small layer on top that hopefully will be just where my scale is, and by the time I cut it off very carefully, I'll still have this nice 50 layer pattern on top of my blade. So what I want to do now is I'm going to cut up all this material, and I'm going to stack it together. Now the thing with copper is that it has a lower melting point. So either you're very careful when you weld this together, stack it and weld it, or like I do, is I totally enclose it with the mild steel. So I'll have a layer on top and bottom, and then I'll put a small piece on both sides and the front and back. And this will ensure, now I'll weld it all the way around, and this will ensure A couple of things. First, I'm not going to have to use borax to make sure the welds are good. It's going to keep the oxygen out, and it's going to ensure that if I overheat it by chance, the copper's not going to just spew out the sides. This is kind of my easy way of getting this right the first time, especially if you're trying this for the first time. So we'll put this all the way around, totally weld it, and then get into forge welding this billet. Lately, I've been doing a lot more drawing my knives on CAD, making a 3D model, and then printing it out on my 3D printer so I can actually have something physically that I can hold in my hand and try out. Really helps with design. Okay, so I have it between two vices on the CNC, and now I'm going to cut the profile so it'll give me a good indication when I start to set up for the upright and for the bevels where I am in this billet. So what I did was I put in a 1/8 end mill, and I programmed this profile to cut in multiple steps about 50 thou deep. Gives me a good idea where that knife is going to be located onto that billet. So the profile's cut out, and I have this little cutout done. I'll have to clean that up. But now I'm going to take it over and cut off the excess material here, either on the saw or with the grinder. Now, it's all roughed out. Well, the front half is roughed out. See, I did it with the grinder and then kind of ground that edge. So it's a lot closer. There's probably a little bit of material there. Now I'm going to put it onto the CNC again, upright, and with a ball nose cutter, I'm going to cut this in 3D, the bevels. This one first, and then the opposite side. So that's right off the CNC, and that pattern looks awesome so far. Well, the only thing we can see is really the copper. Once we start seeing the Damascus in there, or the other layers, it's gonna really look nice. See it cut nicely in the middle. The 1095 is pretty much centered, which is really good. We don't want any copper there because copper is so soft. But now I'm going to put it on the opposite side, and I'm going to cut this bevel, and I'm going to rough out this angle here on the CNC. Starting to look really nice. That's just after the machining. I'm going to do a little bit of sanding right now with the belt grinder, and then I'm going to put it on CNC again and cut out this with a saw. So now that I'm waiting for the furnace to get a little warmer, I'm going to be heat treating it, and you have to be really careful because the copper can melt before the steel gets really hot. So there's a fine line between getting the copper at a melting point and the steel at a heat treating point. So I got to be very careful looking at it, putting it in and out of the forge, just making sure I don't overheat it. And then we're going to quench it in the oil. Getting warm now. pattern came out really nice. The copper bonded perfectly with the Damascus steel that I mixed it with. Next is we're going to be building a guard for it, and I'm going to be making it out of copper also. Not sure what I'm going to make the handle and stuff out of, but you're going to have to watch next week as I start making the guard and the handle for this copper and steel Damascus knife. Thanks again for watching Bonifabcustom. Don't forget to subscribe, push that button for notifications for the next videos on this build.